Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jo Davich. I'm the director here at the Georgia Center for the Book. On behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book and the DeKalb County Public Library, the DeKalb Library Foundation, and Read SC, the South Carolina Center for the Book, tonight is the second event in our spring On My Mind series brought to you by the Georgia Center for the Book and Read SC, the South Carolina Center for the Book. This virtual reading series celebrates authors, publishers, and books from both sides of the Georgia and South Carolina border. Our goal is to explore a variety of topics and genre through the interest of Georgians and South Carolinians. We hope these events will put books, writers, and topics featured in this series on your mind. Also, don't forget to join us for the third and final virtual event in the spring edition of the On My Mind series, featuring poets Miranda Dekine, who wrote the chapbook Thresh and Hold, published by Hub City Press, and Ramalika Imhotep, whose chapbook is called Gossipip. A few things before we begin our event tonight. You'll see in the chat that we have USC Press and the University of Georgia Press, where you can order copies of the books that we'll be discussing this evening. Also, if you would like to ask a question, please feel free to do so by using the Q&A feature. You'll find the Q&A feature at the top or the bottom of your screen, and when you click on it, a text box will open and you can type in your questions there, and we'll ask those at the end of the formal presentation. Also, if you are hearing impaired or need to use the live transcription feature, we have enabled that for this evening. Click on the CC button and you can make the font as large or as small as required. Tonight, we feature Eric Sean Crawford, here to discuss his book, Gullah Spirituals, The Sound of Freedom and Protest in the South Carolina Sea Islands. He will be in conversation with Art Rosenbaum, the author of Shout Because You're Free. In Gullah Spirituals, musicologist Eric Crawford traces the Gullah Geechee songs from the beginning in West Africa to the height as songs of social change and Black identity in the 20th century American South. While much has been done to study, preserve, and interpret Gullah culture in the lowcountry and sea islands of South Carolina and Georgia, some traditions like shouting and rowing songs have been all but forgotten. This work, which focuses primarily on South Carolina's St. Helena Island, illuminates the remarkable history, survival, and influence of spirituals since the earliest recordings in the 1860s. Eric Sean Crawford is the director of the Benedict College Honors Program and holds a PhD in musicology from the Catholic University of America. He is the former director of the Charles W. Joyner Institute for Gullah and African Diaspora Studies at the Coastal Carolina University and served as a musical consultant for the Amazon series Underground Railroad and is featured in the Henry Louis Gates' Vinnie series, The Black Church. The ring shout is the oldest known African-American performance tradition surviving in North America. Performed for the purpose of religious worship, this fusion of dance, song, and percussion survives today in the Bolton community of McIntosh County, Georgia. Incorporating oral history, first-person accounts, musical transcriptions, photographs, and drawings, Shout Because You're Free documents a group of performers known as the McIntosh County Shouters. Shout Because You're Free is the result of 16 years of research and fieldwork by Art and Margot Rosenbaum, authors of Folk Visions and Voices. Art is a painter, draftsman, muralist, folk musician, and professor of art at the Lamar Dodd School of Art at the University of Georgia. We have some wonderful photographs and some music samples for you all to hear and enjoy this evening. I thank you so much for joining us. And right now I would like to turn it over to our two featured presenters, Art and Eric. Gentlemen.
Thank you so much for having me here. And I'm looking forward to talking about my book. And it's a joy to be sharing the stage with Art Rosenbaum, legendary Art Rosenbaum. He again was one of the first to really review my book and to really kind of share his thoughts and to encourage me. And so for me, this is sort of a coming full circle moment to be able to really enjoy speaking to him and getting his feedback and sharing my thoughts about him.
Well, if contributed anything to your great work a little bit, then I'm pleased to hear that, Eric.
Thank you. I guess first I'll talk about my book, I guess. And so in the Gullah Spirituals book, it kind of goes through almost in a chronological manner from the beginnings, the African, West African beginnings through until the civil rights. And so I'll begin by discussing the area that Art knows so well, the praise house and the ring shout, which are some of the greatest African traditions. And so for me, I remember going through Art's book ever so carefully. And one thing that he said, and I agree, there's a debate. Do the dancers and singers doing this counterclockwise ring shout, are they thinking of some circle, the idea of this circle from death to, from birth to a life to death and to a rebirth as they are circling counterclockwise. And so in my book, I said that even though there's been evidence that initially the enslaved Africans were reenacting that circle, that my singers had no idea of that. And so Art, what are your thoughts on that circling and its purpose?
Yeah, that's been my impression from conversations with Lawrence McIver and some of the older shouters that they were not specific about the symbology of the counterclockwise movement. That was what you did, but there was certainly integrated into the tradition, honoring their ancestors, what they had gone through, and certainly an acknowledgement, which Deacon Jim Cook, who was the oldest of the group that went out to perform the shout for the public, he said it's from Africa. My people brought it from Africa, so they would be very specific about that. Not so specific, of course. We outsiders can learn a lot, but we don't know. We're not told everything.
That's right.
I think of Lydia Parrish's book from the early 40s. She lived on St. Simon's Island. She wrote a great collection, slave songs of the Georgia Sea Islands, and a wonderful collection. And she collected a lot of the shout songs, spirituals, shanties, and some secular songs. And she did not really acknowledge having heard about the meanings of the shout songs that had coded protests against the slavery system and all that. But Lawrence McIver, many years later, when he was part of the group that went to the Smithsonian Folk Festival, to St. Simon's Folk Festival, he would explain as well as he could what the meanings of the words were. He said, now we can spit it out. It wouldn't have, Lydia Parrish is as friendly as she was to her singers, and as much good material she got, did not get the meanings of the songs. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit
Right.
later. The words and the verses, I guess, were more specific to situations, also grafted on, of course, to the Christian religion, more so than whatever the movement might have signified, except that you had to do it right. It had to be dignified. You had to be level on the shout. You couldn't cut out, you couldn't cross your legs because that would be dancing. So there were certain rules that certainly had to have deeper reasons.
Now, I contend that their strictness in terms of your feet can't come very high off the ground, or your legs couldn't cross, was also kind of, I think, based upon perhaps their perceptions, and I could be wrong, of how the white missionaries viewed it. Was it sacred? Was it secular? And in my book, I said something like, this is the first example really of having a good time. But for them, it was their moment of freedom, of fun, though it still had to be cloaked in this sacredness. That sense of secular and sacred together. Any thoughts on that? I mean, was it?
Right on. That's I agree very much so. There were some of the shout songs that were not religious in their meaning. One of them, Hold the Baby, you know, about a baby acting up, and a few of the shout songs were about daily life and we're certainly recreational as well as sacred. There wasn't really there was a different mood to the different shout songs. So some would be almost apocalyptic and very moving. Some would have a certain amount of humor. Some would have a specific little protest. There's McIver sang a song, Drive Old, and the present day shout would say, Drive Old Joe. Joe was a cheese eater, which meant that he was one of the slaves that would tell the old boss on the others, his fellows, if he thought that they're doing something that the boss wouldn't approve of. And so they said, Drive Old Joe, drive him out the window. And the movements of the shout kind of pantomime or act that out, get out of here. And that had some humor. And then also picking up leaves, where Adam and Eve are picking up leaves to cover their nakedness. The movement of the shout, in addition to the kind of shuffling movement, also has that pantomime. So there was that recreational element and kind of community cohesiveness to it. And just this is kind of an offshoot, but the ring shout, as been privileged to see it, and as this group is still carrying it on, is pretty much what it was when it was observed during the 1860s by people like Higginson from the North and Frederick Allen, who wrote the book Slave Songs of the United States, in its older form, all its elements. But other elements have gone into the, as I know you've documented and pointed out, have gone into the larger cultures, and sometimes the secular culture, like some observers said, well, the cakewalk and the minstrel shows, which are, which are up for a certain amount of deploring criticism, but it was a kind of an offshoot of that kind of movement. It was one direction that the older shout developed into, which is very different from the older forms.
Now, I believe in your book, you kind of talk about how the ring shout survived in McIntosh County. And on St. Helena Island, really by the mid 20th century, it was all but gone. But, and so I theorized, and I kind of just examined why. And one of the influences was Penn School or Penn Center. They kind of really worked to kind of discourage that. But then in McIntosh County, if I remember, you kind of mentioned how that community was so insulated, kind of stayed there. And though they had jobs, it wouldn't take them away from that community. Is that correct, or?
Yeah, you hear people talking about the Sea Islands and the isolation of the Sea Islands contributing to the survival of older traditions, and it's sort of like people talk about the Appalachian coves, or why the old Elizabethan ballads survived. And there's that's not always the case. The Sapelo Island off the coast of Georgia used to have ring shouts. They had several communities and a school. No school there. The kids few kids have to go to take the boat to the mainland. The Bolton community is 2 miles from the interstate highway. And as you say, people could go to Brunswick or Savannah and work at jobs and keep the community fairly cohesive. There was some emigration and problems, but that was one thing that we ascertained. And the other was that there were some particularly strong, I've been taken to task for using this pompous word, tradition bearers, but that would be Reverend Palmer, Nathan Palmer, who did not go out with the performing group. He just didn't want to do that. And Lawrence McIver, whom we've talked about, and several others who were just deeply committed to this tradition, honoring the 6 daughters of London and Amy Jenkins, who were born as enslaved people who married, and they were the parents of 6 women who were very strong shouters, and two sons that not much was known about. But it was a family tradition, and the younger members of the family who are still performing the shout will acknowledge London and Amy Jenkins and also Reverend Palmer as being people who wouldn't let it. They said they didn't want to let it go by. I guess the same thing as you pointed out about South Carolina is also true of St. Simon's in Georgia. The Georgia Sea Island singers carried sang a lot of the same songs and had wonderful old songs and great singers, but the actual community ring shout had kind of died out by the 1940s.
Yes. I think there are questions for us. I think Joe mentioned that.
Yeah.
Yeah, gentlemen, I was just going to interject real quick because I sensed a small thing. What is the differences between spirituals, shouts, and shanties?
Okay. In terms of, I'll take the spirituals and the shouts, or I'll try to. Deacon James Garfield Smalls, I'm not sure if you can pull up his own picture, Joe, but he would always say, and he died 2 years ago, it was at age 100. He would always say that any song can be a shouting song. And so for him, it's just how it was set. But William Allen in the slave songs of the United States says that oftentimes both songs and shouting songs were the same. It's very interesting. So, that's a form of song that I talk about first, are boat songs. This idea of you're on the waters and and these slave rowers who had to carry passengers up and down the waters, Charleston down to South Carolina or to Georgia. And they would sing these songs and row in motion. Of course, the most famous being Michael, Row the Boat Ashore. But there were other songs too that were equally used within the praise house, Prays house as well. But, and typically, and Art can confirm this, that oftentimes the songs would start slower and then speed up as the emotions got more involved. And so, but I've heard them say, now there were songs that you typically wouldn't be able to move to, but oftentimes there was a blurred line in what spirituals were and what ring shout songs were. Art, perhaps you can comment on that, or shanties.
Yeah, I'm sure that that is true in some communities, and the example that you cite where there is merging in the McIntosh County community, the line tends to be differentiation tends to be a little stricter. There are of course, the hymns, which are the lined out hymns, which are an old tradition. then the spirituals, which would be sung in a church service, which could be to various leaders. And then the shouters will say these shout songs, and it's a distinct repertoire. There's a little bit of an overlap, but not very much. These were, I think Alan or one of the early writers said that they heard the term run-in spirituals for the songs that were used for the shout. That I didn't hear that term. It must have been an earlier term. But the shanties, of course, were work songs, and Deacon Cook sang one song that he was a timber stowing shanty. They would raft logs down the Altamaha River to Darien, and with a hook and a leader and chorus call and response song, they would load these timbers. They'd take the raft apart, load the timbers onto schooners in Darien, and he would lead those songs. And he said, and when the shouters would do the performance of the shout, he would interject. He said, "Here's my shanty. I'm a noble soldier, soldier of the Jubilee." Yeah, he said they didn't have these modernistic machines. It was the muscle and the song. And of course, the term shanties was used much more widely by sailors in the English-speaking world from Britain to America. But it was that term was used. But as I heard it described, the old spirituals were differentiated. Then a more recent time, Jubilee songs came in, which were a little more upbeat, and then they evolved into gospel songs. So spirituals are usually used for the kind of older songs, but the shout songs were the shout songs.
And typically for the praise houses on Helena Island, there'd be that service beforehand that was much more formal. You would hymnline, as you mentioned, you read a scripture, you would call the meter, common, long, or short, prayer, and then they would move the benches off to the side and begin that, to me, that fun time now, that shouting time now. And so that was always, to me, exciting.
Yeah, I've heard this, the Mount Calvary Baptist Church, which most of the McIntosh County shouters are members of, was modernized, put that in air quotes, some years ago, because Deacon Cook said it's a dead church with a concrete floor. The pews were attached to the floor. They couldn't push the benches aside the way they did in the old days, but they built an annex to the church where they'd have church suppers and all with a wooden floor, with the intention that you could have the percussion. I don't know if we mentioned this, but there was percussion, which was any handy stick, but the shouters, when I first met them, used a broomstick, but it could be any stick. And a small house or a praise house, or even a church or an annex at church could be like resonate like a drum, like the stick was a substitute drum. There are reports that there were some drums that were used in some areas of Georgia in the 19th century, although they were forbidden in most areas. But the stick with I think Johann Bass, who did the musical transcriptions of our book, he analyzed the rhythms. May not being a musicologist, couldn't exactly. It's a fairly simple rhythm: 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, something like is that.
Right.
You get it, but it still had to. The stick was an integral part of the whole thing, and then the call and response. The leader would as you say, sometimes start slowly and then build to the appropriate tempo, and the responding singers would be called basers, and that's an old term that Alan and some of the others said was in use back in the mid 19th century.
Right. Now, what's interesting is on the Sea Islands that I analyzed, there was no stick. It would be your foot stomping and clapping.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how that changed or who added that in terms of the Georgian experience, but they would sit down, they would start with a very simple stomping beat.
Yeah.
Then the hand would do that B+B+2 of that clave pattern. And that was what they had for accompaniment. And I was always curious why they didn't have that stick there. Did you ever did you see those differences between Georgian and South Carolinian approaches there? In terms of the stick for those in Georgia and the non-stick for those in South Carolina?
Not really. I can't really count. It may be just a local tradition or something. It was the Georgia group would consider the stick or the percussion an integral part of the whole thing. I know that Robert Gordon, a folklorist in the early 20th century, who documented the shout in South Carolina, he described the ring shout. I don't know if he mentions a stick or percussion, but he said he describes different forms of the shout. He said it wasn't always done as a movement, a circular movement. Sometimes it was the shouting was done in place with the hand clapping and all. It's very much like what you're describing. So he said there were various forms that he observed.
Right, and I've heard that once the benches became nailed to the floor, that stopped this circular motion. I've heard that. I'm not sure that's true or not, but that seemed to have been, when that formal church was built. Yeah. And those benches were kind of in place now. Then that sort of, and perhaps that was intentional, in a sense.
Yeah. Well, and Macadash County, they, as I said a minute ago, they intentionally used to have a wooden floor in their annex, and also described they would describe as we were saying earlier that some of the shouts were in praise houses and in the earlier days, and some in people's own houses, small houses. They said between Christmas and New Year's, watch night. That was the main time to welcome in the new year with a shout after the formal church service. But the old timers say that they don't do it anymore, but in the olden days they would have shouts all the time, especially that week between Christmas and New Year's. And I think it was McIver who described that sometimes the movement would get pretty lively, and these cabins were very simple wooden structures, and they were up on stone sills to keep them off the ground. And sometimes they'd shake loose, and the house would slide off the sills, and the next day everyone would come back and lift the house up and put it back on the sills. But that didn't stop the shout from taking place. They heard a lot of affectionate memories of those days.
I guess it'll be great to kind of hear some of these shouting songs. Just want to play one for us, Art.
Well, can you play the one that you had?
Okay. This is Adam in the Garden, and the lead singer is one of my old singers, Minnie Gracie Gatson on St. Helena Island, and she does the traditional Adam song there that she knows. And then I have these college students to add a bit of a jazzy kind of part to it. And so this is sort of our contemporary version, just showing how this music can be used in many different settings, traditionally or more contemporary, jazz, hip hop even. So here is Adam in the Garden picking up Leaf. I know Joseph played on that.
Where's Adam? Adam in the garden. Picking up in the garden, picking up weeds. Mr. Soul, me told me that Adam in the garden, picking up weeds. Where's Adam? Adam in the garden, picking up weeds. In the garden, Adam in the garden, picking up weeds. I went in the valley one day to pray, Adam in the garden, picking up weeds. So I'm happy I stayed all night, Adam in the garden, picking up weeds. Where's Adam? Adam in the garden, picking up weeds. Picking up, Adam in the garden, picking up weeds. My mother has to walk on the floor, Adam in the garden, picking up weeds. Feet got slip and the soul got lost, Adam in the garden, picking up weeds. Where Adam? Adam in the garden, picking up weeds.
And so as you heard, there were two things there that I want to point out. One, at the end, he tried to assimilate that ending vamp in which it gets to about 2 or 3 words now. And the singer has to improv over that for several minutes. And also, Minnie says, Adam in a garden picking up leaf. And she still remembers that sense of that Gullah Geechee language. The nouns are singular and plural are the same. And so it's 1 leaf, 2 leaf, 3 leaf, 4 leaf. And for me, that's extraordinary that is still retained in that song there.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the melody and most of the words are quite similar to the ones that are sung in McIntosh County. I noticed that the refrain is sung in harmony. There's some intervals, so not in unison, and the McIntosh County shouters would generally sing the refrain in unison. They've tended to add some harmonies now that they've become a performing group, and
right.
We add a few things to because it's a dynamic, growing tradition. So there is a little bit more of the harmony sing, but that's quite quite similar to, I think, the Sea Island singers, Bessie Jones and Mabel Hiller, I think they sang something that fairly similar.
Right. Do you have something that you wanted to play as well, or?
Let me see if I can get this going.
Yeah, that song is very iconic, where oftentimes, as you know, the dancers would bend down to pick up the leaf.
Well, I can play a little of this.
Tell everybody, my God say, that they got to meet, oh, blow, be round, oh, blow that trumpet, loud and louder, want to wake my people, wherever they be, on land or sea, let's tell everybody, my God say, that they got to meet, oh, blow, be round, oh, blow that trumpet, loud and louder, want to see my mother,
I'll play a little of this next one for, if it'll go on.
So I'm gonna sing one of the slave songs that they like to sing. This after they come out of slave, they sing this song, Jubilee in the morning. Jubilee, Jubilee, oh, my Lord. Jubilee in the morning, my Lord, Jubilee, Jubilee in the evening, oh, my Lord, Jubilee in the morning, my Lord, Jubilee, 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 oh, my Lord, Jubilee, Jubilee, my Lord, Jubilee, walking men was walking, oh, my Lord, walking on your Jesus, my Lord, Jubilee, shout my children for the free, oh, my Lord, my God brought you liberty, my Lord, Jubilee, call me a Sunday Christian, oh, my Lord, call me a Monday devil, my Lord, Jubilee,
I don't know if you,
oh, my Lord, so now Jesus loved me.
I don't know if the listeners could catch the words of that. Of course, the first selection was the McIntosh County Shouters version of the Even Adam, and you can see this some similarity. And
Right.
the lead singer was Lawrence McIver, and the second song gave the title to our book. If you can,
Oh, shout because you're free.
it's Shout Because You're Free, and it's Jubilee. And he explained, he sang that was recorded in a public performance, and he was explaining that this was sung at the Emancipation, a Jubilee in the morning, and shout because you're free, shout my children because you're free. And then he another verse went call me a Sunday Christian, call me a Monday devil, referring to the slave masters. You know, okay, go to church on Sunday, but they had nothing but contempt on Monday, and had to do the grueling work. And McIver wanted to know that that's a song like that celebrated the emancipation and also helped sustain the his community and the people ongoing. So that seemed to be the appropriate title. So that was this was the book that Shout Because You're Free. It came out in let's see, when did it come out? 83, I think it was. But then anyway, that's available through the University of Georgia
Right.
Press.
And I tell you, I am modeled, as I looked at your book, I thought, okay, I have to make sure that I add my transcriptions towards the end of my book, copying after you. And I haven't contacted Johan, is that his name, Johan?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we talked about that, but yeah, it's just fantastic. One thing that you kind of alluded to is that once these wonderful performers go to stage and are now performing for an audience, there will be natural changes that will occur. Can you speak to what you observed, and were you concerned that they would alter what they were doing?
Well, you know, they're the folks that are in the possession of the music and the tradition and the history. So, you know, I tried to observe and see what was and be respectful of the changes. There were certain they sometimes the words were used. Showmanship, you know, we'd make some of the shout would be there'd be some more dramatic gestures. Then, as I said, harmonies were added. There was always an explanation. At first McIver and Deacon Cook would explain, and then Betty Ector, who is a member of the community, who is a professor in Brunswick, would explain the history, and so they thought that people should people should know what the tradition was all about. And McIver was very proud of that. I remember at the I think it was this National Folk Festival at Wolf Trap Farm. He said there was another stage, and there was a bunch of blues players. He said they were blowing the blues, they were playing the blues, but all these young people, white and black, they would gang me. They'd want to know about that. They come over to hear us, and so it took its course, and did change. The when the very first performance was in 1980 in St. Simon's at the folk festival that was organized by the Sea Island singers Frankie and Doug Quimby. I have to give them credit for organizing the festival. They have various traditions in that area, and they'd heard of that there was a group that was a community in McIntosh County that did the ring shouts on watch night, the way their grandparents had done it, or up to the 40s. And Fred Fussell and George Mitchell and the Quimbys found Lawrence McIver, and he said, I'll get this group together. And there was only certain people in the community that were interested in doing that. And the men would be wearing overalls and straw hats, and the women had these, head rags and long skirts and all, and look kind of like an old timey costume to some viewers. They say, well, and they said, why are we bringing out all this old fashioned stuff? They did not agree with that. They said, this is the way Charlotte Evans, Lawrence McIver's mother, that's the way she and her sisters dressed, and they had long sleeves, and the men wore overalls, and they thought that was totally appropriate. And so that I learned something about just asking. Now the group would tend to wear matching costumes that are sort of with African design influence, as I see it, which is stunning.
Right. My own singers, it's so interesting. I have several singers who are still in the church and heavily involved in the church who want to sing newer gospel songs and so forth. And I really have to fight intervening because, there again, it's a living, breathing, changing form. And so
Sure.
it's difficult to want to keep in that box and keep it in that time period because they see what's happening today. And so for me, that's why it's important to try contemporary versions and do new ways to kind of reinterpret. So it keeps it for them new and fun instead of being stale and archaic,
Yeah, and the older forms can coexist with the newer forms. And have you met Brenton Jordan? He's the stick man of the McIntosh County Shouters now. He's the youngest. He's about 30 now, but he's a very interesting guy to talk to because he's very, very knowledgeable about related traditions to the ring shout in West Africa and Brazil, and he studied modern dance and works in a lot of idioms. But when he was a kid, he hung around with his great grandmother Anita Ellison, and he wanted to learn from her. And so when he performs the shout, I heard just a month or so ago we did a little kind of discussions at the Savannah Music Festival with the McIntosh County Shouters, and he said that he's finally finding his own voice for singing these songs. But it is he feels it's very authentic. It's his own voice, and he doesn't incorporate all these modern idioms that he knows about. There's something you might be interested in the way he also speaks the, I guess what you call the Gullah dialect. He
Right.
can do that. And he also writes it in emails. And his friends say, what is this all about? And he says, well, just pronounce it, speak it the way you read it phonetically, and you might understand it. Maybe you can speak to that. I defer to you and your knowledge of the dialect, which I don't know much about.
Well, I'm not Gullah Geechee, but one thing that I have, I focus on towards the end of my book, and I asked Ron Days, I'm sure you know who he is, to help me transcribe these spirituals, like nobody knows the troubles I've seen, Roe Jordan Roe, and transcribe them perhaps as a Gullah speaker would have done them. And so to me, we have oftentimes for these very popular songs, even William Allen says in his preface, which is a great discussion of the language, he'll say, well, initially this song had these words here, but we altered them a bit, and so for me, it'd be great to go back to and to hear these songs as they were done. And, in a sense of recognizing how we've kept the tunes, we've kept the rhythms, but we altered those words over time. And so for me, and of course, I'm a musicologist, and so I'm sure I'm sort of caught in my own sense of authenticity. But going back and inserting the language as it was done would be kind of neat for me. Because I ask for singers, well, how do you say hello? And they'll say, how do you do? I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it'd be great hearing those songs back in its older language.
It would. It might not sound all different. When we had the manuscript of this book, and our editor Karen Orchard sent it out to reviewers, to scholars in the field, one of the critiques from one particular scholar was a critique of my effort to use some phonetic spellings of the songs and of some of the interviews, to sort of as I heard them. And there was this reviewer who really reproached me for saying that it's for trying to do that. It said that it's dialectical spellings of speech. First place, they can't be really accurate, and also they may be somewhat considered derogatory. It wasn't my intention, but that was the way this person read it. He says, well, ask some of your consultants, the people, what they think. So we had some meetings. I said, what do you think about this? And they, the folks like Carletha Sullivan and Anita, they had no problem with those spelling, because they say, well, that's sort of like the way the song sounded. And Freddie Palmer, I remember, said, well, you don't say walk around heaven, you say heaven.
Yes.
That's and so I did compromise, and we did try in the interviews, I tried to use more standard spelling and consider that appropriate, but in the songs, sometimes the rhymes or the musical sounds wouldn't come out right if they were in standard modern English. It's tough. It's tough to do, but
it is.
Made the best effort we could.
And fantastic one, it is.
Eric, real quick before we turn it over to audience questions, do we want to quickly maybe go through the other pictures that you had and maybe close out before questions with that other audio clip?
Yes. Let's see here. If I could, it's called Army Cross Oba with the B. And again, it's a contemporary version. It's a song that's very popular in Georgia and South Carolina. And we actually kind of copied the Georgia Sea Islands version with Bessie Jones singing. And so this is Army Cross Oba. It's a little soft there. I don't know if it's... Yeah, and so that was really kind of, they heard that version, and so yeah, so they would say Ribba and Oba, and so yeah, it changes how those kinds of going from Oba to Oba, it instantly gives you that percussiveness that I think is key to performing this music, is those subtle changes there, and so thank you, Joe, for playing that.
Yeah.
So once again, if any of you in the audience have questions that you would like to ask, feel free to type it in the Q&A section. Also, if they can't find that, feel free to go type it in the chat. But we did have a few that were related to the songs that we heard as well. And they come from Mimi, and they were these songs done as call and response? And she also noted that we heard some lap slapping possibly in those songs. And also, what, other than mentioning the stick, and using maybe modern instruments as these have come into a more modern type of performance aspect of it, were there other percussion instruments used, not necessarily drums or sticks, but maybe African percussion instruments that would have come over with the enslaved African population?
Well, in terms of percussiveness, of course, there were drums, first drums, but the banjo, that was an instrument that was brought over from there. There were fiddle players, string instruments. There were also bones. They would have bones being played. In fact, there was an account of someone who was playing a fiddle, and a child was on their lap striking the strings as if adding some percussiveness to that playing. So those come to mind. I'm not sure, Joe, if you know of any others. Art, I'm sorry, know of any others, Art.
Yeah, well, yeah, beating straws, that was on a fiddle. Or I've actually heard a couple of white folk musicians in North Georgia beating straws on a banjo.
Wow.
One guy's, they didn't have guitars. The fiddle came in first, and then of course the banjo came from its ancestors came from Africa, but the beating straws for a little added rhythm was probably an African contribution. But then once we get into that, we're getting a little more into the worldly music, or the dancing, or the community, the Saturday night music. Lawrence McIver says one of his sisters used to just play music on a frying pan, just beat on a frying pan. So, but in the stricter ring shout that I'm addressing here, there were no other instruments used. Now, when the shout evolved into different types of gospel, which also uses singing, call and response, then you very likely get other instruments. We actually had the privilege of meeting James Baldwin in Cortona, Italy. My wife told us, a visitor, I was teaching in the UGA art program there, and she said, well, my husband and I have been listening to this very interesting kind of music tradition called the ring shout. And James Baldwin said, oh yeah, we know the ring shout in Harlem churches. And he knew a lot about it, and then we had a great conversation. But it was the offshoot of the shout, and it would have been transformed in those. But it just shows the enduring life of these traditions, and it's also, I do think it's a treasure to have some of these groups who keep the older forms alive. It's good to have both.
And that's the fear for me, is what happens, because those there's the Geechee Gullah ring shouters and the Macintosh, but a lot of those dancers are older.
Yeah.
And so what happens in 15, 20 years? And someone asked that same question of me, of my singers, and I thought, well, it'd be challenging to find those who want to learn these songs and still sing them.
Mm-hmm.
So also, what about in the one song that we heard, Adam, and about the improvisation of it? Was there a lot of improvisation done to the shouts? And you did kind of allude to, it was a shout that was used both in South Carolina and Georgia. So how was it maybe changed or adapted across the border?
I think that these communities, one had shared relatives in various places, and they would, I think, as far as churches and visiting a church only 2 hours away was uncommon, and so I think it was easy for that respect. I think Minnie Gadsden's Adam, she talks about the late 80s and 90s learning that song. And she was part of an older group that she joined when she was in her probably 30s or her 40s. So she learned that song later on. So I think as these groups became popular, they would travel to folk festivals and hear these songs and learn them. But I'm not sure, and Art, and you may know, was Adam an older shouting song, or was more of a contemporary version? I haven't found evidence of it, of hearing it being transcribed or an account before the 50s or 60s.
Yeah, I don't believe it's in the 1867 Allen Ware Garrison book. I don't. Right. I might be wrong, but I think I do think it's it is an older song.
Yeah. I think Lydia does mention it, though, I think.
But the terminology changes, like as much as the specific local traditions, and as you said, people moved. Like Lawrence McIver's father was from South Carolina. His mother's family, the Jenkins family, the London Amy Jenkins, they said that their forebears were from the Bahamas. They said they were Nassauified, and I guess even a casual listener can hear a little similarity in Bahamian speech and some of the speech in the coastal regions of South Carolina and Georgia and they would blend. Nowadays, the McIntosh County Shouters say we represent the Gullah Geechee tradition, because that's become a common term that's widely understood. I just found here that back when I was talking to McIver back several years ago, he said no one around this community, he says they wouldn't they wouldn't use the word Gullah. They didn't really, unless maybe they were talking about South Carolina, and they wouldn't even call it Geechee. They would just say it's the flat speech of the way the old people talk. But they did use the word Geechee. He said he was a river Geechee and not an island Geechee. That's how he described himself. Even though he was a fisherman, he said he liked to live on the mainland because he could get in his car and go somewhere, you know. But he didn't hear the term Gullah is now sort of linked to Geechee, but in the early days, my impression was it was not. So it might have been more of a locally employed term.
Yeah, it's I think Geechee and Gullah were for many years demeaning to many Blacks, and so they would say instantly, "No, I'm not Geechee or Gullah."
Yeah, that's
So where could, like, you know, our folks here tonight or just anybody watching this later, where could we go to find out more about these shouts and songs, and where could we maybe go to hear these? Are they performed? You know, I know Art mentioned the Savannah Music Festival, but where else are these performed that, you know, sort of a casual listener or the person who's interested in this can go and hear these?
Well, there is. I'll speak first.
Go ahead, please, Eric.
There's it's called the Original Gullah Festival in Beaufort, which would be, I believe it's the third weekend in May. I could be wrong, but that's in Beaufort County. And it's on their waterfront there. It's an annual event. Typically the Geechee Gullah ring shouters are there oftentimes, led by Griffin Lotson. He's a commissioner on the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor Commission, but he'll have his group there typically. And so I will say that if you have not heard Bessie Jones and the Georgia Sea Island Singers, YouTube is a great way to kind of see them all. And even, yes.
Yeah. Oh, you know, go ahead. I'm just agreeing with you. And of course, there are recordings too. This was the first recording that I recorded of the McIntosh County group in the 80s, and this is now it's a Smithsonian Folkways recording of the earlier performing group with some of the older. I think they're all passed away with the exception of Freddie Palmer. I think he was in there now. And in about 10 or 12 years ago, and just in time for the African American Museum of History and Culture at the Smithsonian, Smithsonian Folkways put out another a CD that I also did some work on. But this is pretty much the present group. Carletha Sullivan is sort of the organizer of that group, and this is they do some different songs. They do Army crossover, some of the same ones, and some different ones. And yeah, that was a very good suggestion. Now that you can hear all kinds of things on YouTube. I don't know about regular performances though. The McIntosh County Shouters say that they welcome people to come around to their church on watch night after midnight, and they still have an ongoing tradition. We went there about 4 or 5 times, but I'm sorry to say not in recent years, but I know it's still, I don't know what happened during the COVID problem, but generally people are welcome to come at that occasion.
And one shouting song that I felt I mentioned is the Buzzard Lope, which is an extraordinary one.
Yeah.
When you have this handkerchief, and if you get a chance, just Google and Buzzard Lope and the Georgia Sea Island Singers, or maybe even the McIntosh. But it's really you'll find it under lay your body down, Lord, in that old field. And it's a wonderful reenactment of how they're commenting that the way they treated their cows and just throw them out in the field when they died is the way they were treated when they died themselves, in that old field. And it's a powerful stanza. Yes.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for this lively discussion this evening. It's been absolutely wonderful, and it's given us a greater appreciation of the shout. Once again, if you are interested in the books, we have the links over in the chat to the University of South Carolina Press for Eric's book and the University of Georgia Press for Art's book. Once again, gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your time and your knowledge with us. It's been an absolutely wonderful event. And thank you all for allowing us into your homes this evening. Don't forget, we have the third and final in the spring series of the On My Mind series coming up on May 19th. And you can find all of the Georgia Center for the Book programs that we have coming up through June on our Eventbrite. Once again, thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see you all again very, very soon. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Art.
Thank you.
It's been a highlight of my career. Thank you so much.
Well,